Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramsden and I'm very pleased to say my guest today is a regular on the program, the CEO of the EMA, Dr. Joth Singh. Welcome to the program. I wanted to have you on last week, but I know you were in and out of Tobago and doing some other matters that involved your attention.
We had a youth workshop actually in Tobago. One of our annual programs I'm very excited about because it gives me an opportunity to work with the kids.
Well, we can talk about that. I know you weren't fleeing coming on the program because we wanted to talk to you obviously about the turtle, depending which paper you read, debacle or incident in Grande Riviere.
Yeah.
Now, obviously your name has come up several times. Some environmentalists have spoken either on camera or off camera saying that, you should have had more oversight over that particular matter or that the EMA fell down or that afterwards you were too sort of facile in letting the government off. Mm-hmm. What's your take on, I know you're a resilient kind of guy.
Well, I think you have to put it in the context of the circumstances and the reality as we investigated. And I was down on that site 2-3 times before the actual intervention took place, that we were losing large tracts of sand on the beach, and in losing large tracts of sand, we were losing large amount of turtle eggs as well, because turtle would have deposited their eggs in those areas. And that was of concern to, I think, most environmentalists, that while we have a very significant and healthy nesting season on Grande Riviere Beach, that we may have lost the majority of it if action was not taken. Now, clearly, action should have been taken a long time ago, because the river has been meandering up and down that beach for quite a few months.
And basically, it was almost parallel.
It was actually almost parallel at the time that we went down. But the EMA only got involved very late, unfortunately. I mean, we were only informed that we were having some effects on the beach the Thursday before the Saturday that the excavators went in. And we recognized that we needed to take some immediate action. So that was when we got involved and liaised with our ministry to say, look, we really needed to intervene. And the intervention came after that. So we consulted with various groups within Grande Riviere. We consulted with the Grande Riviere Tour Guide Association. We consulted with the Turtle Village Trust, which is the sort of umbrella organization set up to have oversight of conserving turtles in Trinidad and Tobago. And they identified the area of the beach which was, the least impacting, which is where the original mouth of the river would have been, which was sort of east of the location of the beach itself. So that consultation took place with them, and they advised us to where it should be. So, we sort of went off, and you see, there was an issue with regards to coordination as to when it would actually take place. And when it actually took place, the EMA was not aware, so we were not on site. And, while the Director of Drainage had indicated that he didn't feel that the EMA's presence would have made a difference, we feel that it would have made a difference because we would have been able to at least offset or reduce the impact that it had on hatchlings and eggs. So, that was unfortunate. And, while we lost some hatchlings and eggs, really with the intention of preserving or protecting the larger number of eggs and hatchlings on the larger beach itself. That was the intent. That is why the intervention actually took place. It is unfortunate, and as I've said, it's unfortunate that we lost one hatchling. And I sometimes have to remind people that my background is an animal welfare background. So I have tremendous concern for these, and this personally affected me. The first time you were
on this program was in your previous capacity, actually.
That's correct, in the context of protecting whales. So this had a personal impact on me, but, of course, you rationalize things in the context in which it is done, and it was really done to protect the broader, wider population, nesting population.
But I mean, there were those who say, and I think not unreasonably, but that in typical Trinidad style, we may have had good intentions, but we managed to botch the operation to a large extent. Because obviously, I would think the ideal situation is to mitigate whatever damage to the turtle population. Instead, we saw hatchlings being mowed over by bulldozers, eggs being cast all over the place, and that made the international papers and made us look like a laughingstock, didn't it?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we need to recognize as well, Vernon, is that there was some exaggeration of what happened on this site. And, I've seen footage on television, which was provided by one activist group. And it was clear to me that there was some staging as to, the impact on hatchlings. I mean, it was clear to me that there was a gathering of hatchlings to create an impact. And while we recognize that we lost hatchlings, and that is really unfortunate, I think it was exaggerated. And then coming out of the media, there was talk of thousands of hatchlings being lost and thousands of eggs being lost. And, relying on information from the community groups who work and live in that area, and this is their livelihood, really. They were saying, well, okay, we didn't lose 1,000 hatchlings. We didn't lose thousands of eggs. because that area of the beach was heavily impacted by fresh water coming off the Grande Riviere River, changing the incubation conditions of the eggs. And therefore, a lot of the eggs were spoilt. And this is one of the reasons why when the dredging actually took place, people were referring to this very nasty smell, a bad smell, and was suggesting that that was indicative of eggs being destroyed and hatchlings being destroyed. But really what it was that spoiled eggs were being destroyed. And as you know, when you open a bad egg, it smells very badly. So we had lost a number of eggs in that area. And so I think we need to recognize and accept as well that while it was unfortunate that we had this impact, it was exaggerated, and the international media picked up this exaggeration of what actually took place.
But I mean,
and I think that was unfortunate.
But one of the reasons they may have taken it up was we brought in huge bulldozers rather than small guys with shovels or perhaps smaller equipment that probably could have taken a little longer but done the same job. It was the sort of the giant sort of sledgehammer approach as opposed to a more nuanced approach that may have caught the attention of the world's media.
That certainly is something that we need to look at. And I mean, there are many different lessons to be learned from this experience. You know, the shovel approach might have taken a very long time to actually create the channel which is required to have that water drain off, because it's not an insignificant river. And so this sense, and there were engineers advising, of course, from the drainage division as to how this would have been done. And so they felt maybe the excavator was the best way. But I mean, clearly, it could have been done differently.
It wasn't just an excavator, it was a very big excavator. It was one of the largest ones you can get.
And so I think that intervention, you know, we know as we look back, I think it could have been less. We have learned that lesson. It's a very unfortunate one. I mean, I think
it's a lesson about coordination as well, as you mentioned, isn't it? If
well,
they had checked with the EMA, you perhaps instead of bringing in, is it a D9, whatever they call it, excavator, you might have said, well, listen, perhaps that's overkill.
Well, you know, we would have been able to influence in some fashion. But, you know, these things in rural areas, it's very difficult to predict when these things can appear or be made available. And maybe that is one of the reasons that it took so long to have the intervention in the first place. So, you know, I think we need to accept and admit that we could have done it better, that the impact, you know, I think was really very unfortunate. Losing one hatchling, I think, is a significant issue. You know, we lost, you know, a few hundred. You know, again, you know, one of the things that I really need to clarify is that people have been referring to me saying it was only hundreds. But that really was in response to a question of people saying it was thousands. And I said it was not thousands. And a reporter said, well, how many you think was impacted? And I said a few hundred. And that changed to only hundreds, which sort of says that, well, you know, it's only hundreds, so it's a big thing. But it's a big thing. And as I said, you know, we lost one, it was a tragedy. And I think it's really unfortunate as to what happened.
People may also have gotten the impression that you sort of approved of how everything was handled. I think some of the media reports were that you were quite happy with how things transpired.
No, I think that might also be an exaggeration. I don't think anyone was really happy the way it was done. I think we recognize that it was done for a purpose. And so, you know, people might feel warranted in terms of the action, but certainly not happy with it. Not happy that we have lost turtles, not happy that we have lost eggs. And maybe we can learn from this experience and do it differently if it ever happens again. Now, from my perspective, what we need to look at is how we prevent, you know, a similar occurrence. And really, the issue with regards to managing that beach is a critical issue. Grande Riviere Beach is one of the prime nesting sites internationally. And we need to be more proactive in terms of protecting that beach to ensure that if we know that that river is changing its course, that we should put measures in place during the non-nesting season to stabilize the mouth of the river so that we do not have the loss of eggs, as well as to deal with other issues that people have been raising. And you know, recently the EMA hosted a turtle symposium where we were looking at all the factors that need to be considered in protecting turtles. And one of the issues raised about Grande Riviere is that, you know, there's an uncontrolled dog population on that beach during nesting season, and they're having their fill of eggs. Now, of course, the argument from conservationists, some conservationists, is that the number of eggs that are laid on that beach, which, you know, would add up to, you know, 1 million eggs easily, is really because you're dealing with various factors which are impacting on that population of eggs. And the survival of turtles coming from that population of eggs is very, very small. Because when hatchlings get out of the water, they're being attacked by a variety of prey as well. So, you know, it is set up that way, and it's because in the natural way of ensuring that there is some survival of turtles. But I think taking into consideration the impact of dogs and stuff, we need to put in place a management plan for that beach, which can reduce significantly some of these impacts and ensure that there's a long-term viability for the protection and turtle protection.
Well, that brings up the larger question, of course, is what is the EMA's role in regards to things like this? In terms of the normal day-to-day operations of the beach, it falls under forestry, does it not?
It falls under forestry. Certainly that area has some level of protection. The EMA's role really is to, under our legislation, is to facilitate protection, to offer, as our legislation says, some form of coordination. But we have not done that very effectively, and it's an area that we have been trying to focus on. We need to build capacity within the organization to do it. Now, recognizing, of course, that now we have a focused ministry on the environment, the Ministry of Environment and Water Resources. One can expect that this ministry would want to offer that role of coordination to some extent. But, in discussions with our new line minister, Mr. Grande Singh, we are discussing that capacity within the organization needs to be built. The EMA needs to be strengthened as an organization. So you can take on its role in a more forthright way. In addition to its regulatory role, and in addition to its role as an educator, it needs to take on this role of coordination. So that, if we are able to do that in a proper fashion, then maybe we can avoid some of these things from happening in the future.
But in terms of that, given we knew that the river was meandering, I think it was before Christmas, certainly at least, couldn't the EMA at some point have noticed that and said to the relevant people, listen, let's get together, have a meeting, decide how we're going to handle this and mitigate the damage to the turtle population?
Well, I think the EMA was not involved, and that was the issue. We got involved in the turtle conservation issue, really, as a beginning, I would say, from our turtle symposium. Because traditionally it's left to forestry and the Division of Wildlife to really deal with the issues of wildlife protection. And our legislation allows us to designate areas and species as specially protected. Now we have earmarked turtles and 5 species of turtles for designation as environmentally sensitive for a very long time. But because of the conflict in the legislation that existed, where turtles were protected through the forestry legislation, but really not protected through the fisheries legislation for at least a part of the year, it didn't allow us to designate them as environmentally sensitive because they could have been, harvested during some time of the year. But now that the legislation has changed, there is an opportunity for the EMA to have them designated, and we have initiated that process. Indeed, it was one of the things which we discussed at the symposium, the Marine Turtle Symposium, that we need to move forward now with designation of these species as environmentally sensitive. And having done that, it will give the EMA direct opportunity to participate in their protection or conservation. So it's one of the things that we want to do. The other thing that we have been talking about is designating the Grande Riviere Beach maybe as an environmentally sensitive area, which will give the EMA jurisdiction to really manage that under our legislation, so that it would have different layers of protection, certainly already protected through the forestry legislation and wildlife legislation, but to add that other layer of protection from the EMA, which would then give us a responsibility to protect, as part of our mandate through our legislation.
I find it surprising it isn't actually already designated as a
They're not actually, and it's for the reason that the legislation didn't allow us to do that, because of this conflict in the legislation where it was really not protected for the entire year through the Fisheries Act. So now that has been corrected, and recently, so now we feel that we can move forward and take on the responsibility ourselves, rather than leaving it to another agency to do.
Obviously you have your job to do, but there's a certain element of that which is also about the public image of the EMA, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think to a lot of people, when this turtle incident happened, they started looking perhaps not in the brightest possible way at the EMA. In fact, I've had some friends of mine who work generally within the field of the environment saying they should just get rid of the EMA because it really does nothing except performs in a reactionary fashion to things that have already occurred.
I would disagree with that very strongly. I think the EMA has been doing a lot of really good work in recent times. Certainly we have been addressing the issue of noise, in whatever way we can, with the capacity that we have. The entire process in terms of the CC process is a very, very important one for Trinidad and Tobago. And we spend a lot of time considering applications for certificate of environmental clearance, establishing conditions so that, the environment is protected. We now have the water pollution rules, which we are implementing to ensure that our waterways are protected. We have the opportunity of our legislation through the environmentally sensitive areas and species. We're looking to establish waste rules to ensure that we deal with the issue of hazardous waste. So there are many opportunities for the EMA, and we have a very committed staff who are devoting their time and efforts to protecting the environment. So I think, we should not lose sight of that. And certainly, with this issue with regards to the turtles and the episode that happened in Grande Riviere. Again, I think really unfortunate. The intent was clear. I think most people agree that it had to be done. But maybe it could have been done in a more careful fashion. And I think the EMA is committed to doing that.
You're being very temperate. I mean, you're saying maybe it could have been done. I mean, famously, the planning minister said somebody should be held accountable for this.
Yeah, well, again, I think...
He only said it once, of course, but he did say that one time.
I think it's important to understand that the intervention had to take place. It had to take place. Because, as I said, there was an option of not doing anything. And sometimes there's a safe place to be. You can say, look, I'm not going to deal with this because if I intervene, there's going to be some impact. And I don't want to deal with that, so I'm not going to do anything. Mm-hmm. And maybe that is why nothing was done, and that is why thousands, tens of thousands of eggs were being lost on that beach. Because maybe people didn't want to do anything. And
but there's one thing when tens of thousands of eggs are being lost because of a natural phenomenon, as opposed to we as sentient human beings who can actually try to mitigate damage, and we choose not to.
Well, when you look, and I think you need to look at it in that way, that although it was a natural occurrence, and maybe natural in the context of it happens periodically, the net result is that tens of thousands of eggs were being lost, and we would have lost the majority of the nesting season. And I don't know if it would have been satisfying for us to say, well, it's for natural reasons, so it's okay. Instead of having an intervention, which had an impact, we lost, as I said, we lost maybe in the vicinity of hundreds of turtles, and we lost eggs as well. But when you compare that with the potential loss, as you say, through natural means, hundreds of thousands of eggs, is it that it was more comfortable to say it was natural and therefore we lost those and it was then okay, we don't feel in any way?
I was simply saying one is a natural phenomenon, therefore nature does what it does, whether it's for good or bad, but we are capable of making decisions that can really affect the turtles in a meaningful way.
And the general consensus was that, we made an intervention supported by the Turtle Village Trust, supported by the Grande Riviere Tour Guides Association, that the intervention was required. And by intervening, that we would have reduced the impact, the natural impact, as you put it, and that it was better to have some impact, because, whenever you intervene in that way, there's going to be an impact. Clearly, you will try and reduce it to the significant level. But that impact, whatever it was going to be, would have been significantly less than the impact of the natural event, as you put it. And in the minds of conservationists, that, that it was warranted to take that intervention. And we need to admit that it could have been done better, but I think the intervention was well-intentioned and had a net benefit to the issue of hatchlings, eggs, marine turtles, leatherback turtles on that beach. And I think we need to accept that.
Now, if the area is eventually declared sensitive area and you have oversight over it, you would obviously be looking at things that the river is starting to meander early on and try and step in at that point, as opposed to waiting till it becomes a complete calamity.
There is a planned intervention even now. I know we're not going to wait until the species are identified as environmentally sensitive species. We are planning an intervention. Indeed, one of the things that the EMA will be coordinating is a meeting in Grande Riviere with the key stakeholders. A discussion as to what needs to be done in the, as soon as possible. Do we need to stabilize the exit of the river into the ocean? That needs to be done. Do we need to deal with the issue of the changing dynamics of that beach? There are natural occurrences as well, which can be controlled to some extent, and therefore creating a more viable population of turtles coming from that area. Dealing with issues with regards to sustainable livelihoods, so because we need to look at that, because people are earning their livelihoods from that. They're no longer harvesting turtles for meat, but now leading tours on Grande Riviere Beach and earning a livelihood. Can we enhance that in any way? Is there a way that we can look at the issue of the amount of eggs that are lost at every season? I mean, I go down to Grande Riviere every year since I've been in Trinidad, and every time I go down there, you see eggs being washed away by the water, sometimes less than others, compared to this year, for example. Is there some way that we can ensure some higher level of recovery by an intervention, and therefore supporting the population of leatherback turtles internationally? These are sort of things that we want to look at, and in fact, we're planning a meeting in Grande Riviere with the key stakeholders to start that discussion and to ensure that beach is managed in a fashion which would contribute to the conservation of leatherback turtles in Trinidad and internationally. I think that is very important.
In terms of the equipment moving on the beach, would it have been possible to have perhaps allocated a few days for some of the conservation groups to come in and try and rescue whatever eggs or hatchlings they could?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would have been one of the strategies to adopt. But again, I think it was a matter of identifying, the time that the excavator was available to come in. The initial area which was identified for excavation, we looked at it and we didn't feel that there would have been any significant impact. But when the excavators came in, and I guess with the guidance of the engineers from Drainage Division and other people who were there, the footprint, so to speak, was much larger than we had anticipated, and therefore, it's, I think, important lessons learned, and at a cost, a significant cost, in the context of losing 100 turtles, whatever the numbers were, significant cost. But we have learned that lesson, and I think we can do it. If ever it has to be done again, it will be done very differently.
Did you have a lot of the international press calling you in terms of balance, if they were reporting the fact that in one case, I think 20,000 turtles were bulldozed? Would they have called you for your response?
Yes, I did speak with some houses in international press. And, the message really was that, while we regret what has happened in the context of losing any amount of turtles, that the intervention really was a necessary one to protect the larger nesting population. And questions with regards to, thousands of turtles being lost, hatchlings being lost, eggs being lost. And I sort of clarified that it really was not in that number. It wasn't in that large number. It was lower. And that we at the EMA were very concerned that we lost even 1, 10, hundreds, whatever. And I think that maybe clarified some of the issue, because there are many people in Trinidad who felt that, we didn't do a good job of representing the facts. While there are many environmentalists still speaking about the issue of the intervention in Grande Riviere, the reality is that we didn't represent that well initially. And that is
Although, to be
important.
fair, the local media were a little more conservative than the international media in terms of hyperbole, as far as I could tell. Nobody here said 20,000.
Well, indeed, in some cases, yes, I did hear that figure mentioned.
Wasn't us?
Well,
right.
yeah,
Okay.
but I did hear that, and I did hear thousands as well. And, the footage that was carrying was representing something which really might not have represented what happened on site. But, I guess we can go back to that and keep saying that, it was exaggerated. The numbers were not as significant. And we need to bring that balance to the reporting. And it's one of the things that I have said myself that, I think while we are very concerned about protecting the environment, and in this case, protecting turtles, some sense of reality needs to prevail as well, because you see, when maybe it's over-enthusiasm or a level of exuberance which would make an activist make certain statements as to loss. But we need to understand that we are, painting Trinidad and Tobago, because these things attract attention very easily on the international scene. And if it is exaggerated, then people are left with that impression, because they don't know that it has been exaggerated in terms of numbers and statements that we are making. And I think we really need to be very careful about that. And, again, coming back to the point that, of course, we could have done it better. But let's not exaggerate it at the same time.
In terms of a silver lining to the whole thing, I suppose you as a conservationist at heart, and I know you are, with your whale background, it must be somewhat gratifying for you to see at least the world takes on subjects like this nowadays. It really spreads around the globe. It becomes an international story when something like this happens. That is, in terms of the protecting of wildlife and endangered species, a good thing, isn't it?
It is extremely satisfying that, we are at that stage where, people are concerned and speaking out on the issue. The reason that Trinidad and Tobago is so outstanding in the context of number of leatherback turtles is because there's a commitment to conservation. I mean, it didn't happen by accident. The legislation has been changed really to support the non-harvesting of turtles. The fact that many groups in Trinidad and Tobago are active, including Village Turtle Trust and these tour guide associations, Grande Riviere Tour Guide Association and Grande Riviere, they have been intervening really to protect the turtles, and all these things are very positive. Because, I think it's important to recognize as well that members of the community have recognized that this is a sustainable way of earning a living, sustainable livelihood opportunity. And so they are caring for the turtles to protect them, yes, but also protect them because it's supporting their livelihoods. So I think locally, yes, we have made some significant strides, and that is very, very heartening for me. Nationally, we have a very active group of people who are involved in terms of advocacy. And, we're using all these social media opportunities to promote and raise issues. And that is very encouraging as well. And internationally, it is spiraling. As somebody, as an environmentalist and a conservationist, I am very happy and satisfied to see that we are at that level. I think we need to measure it very carefully now and maybe to not allow over-enthusiasm to not paint the right picture, because I think that is equally as important, Vernon, that when we are conveying a message, that it is well represented, that we're not painting it and exaggerating it, because that has a lot of damage as well, and we need to recognize that.
I suppose to some extent with any sort of movement, including the environmental movement, it tends to be a bit of overkill first as people suddenly switch into that mindset, and then it sort of calms down, doesn't it?
Well, we expect that it will, and it's a maturing that is taking place. And certainly, we have recognized that in Trinidad, where, when I joined the EMA and came back to Trinidad in 2008, there are a lot of groups who were just very active, raising problems really without engaging in solutions. And I've witnessed a maturing of groups. I mean, Friends and Fishermen of the Sea, for example, very active in suggesting ways that we can intervene to protect the environment. And, we are working with some information that they have provided, for example, on the impact of seismic surveys on fish populations in Trinidad and Tobago, which is becoming a significant issue. So we have groups that are now coming up to the front and saying, okay, we want to assist. We don't only want to say there's a problem. What are you doing about that? You're not doing anything about this. There is a movement as well in Trinidad where they are getting themselves involved, and that is entirely encouraging. As you say, it's a maturing process. But as you have new groups entering the picture, they go through that cycle. Of wanting to be heard and wanting to be seen, and hopefully they would move in that direction.
And I'm sure you've seen it all before, and you'll see more to come.
I expect so.
Dr. Joth Sigh, always a pleasure having you on the program.
A pleasure to be
here. Thank you so much for being here. You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.